Okay. So the traditional economic assumptions on decision on crime and lying or unethical behavior assume that people are selfish and that people only consider the cost of lying that are really evident or that are strategic cost of lying. Imagine like the model of Becker that it's only considering like as a cost of lying the potential fine or punishment that the agent is facing, and also consider maybe the probability of being caught, but not other type of cost. However, the lab experiments on lying have shown that people have also psychological cost of lying. And the main is, or the main fact to thinking about psychological cost of lying was that a lot of experiments on lying in the lab find that people lie, but don't lie at the full extent. So it's not just a cost benefit between probability of being caught, penalties, and monetary payoff. But when there is no probability of punishment and not punishment, even in these cases, there are people that not lie or not lie as much as the traditional economic modeling will suggest. So in the recent years, there have been mainly these 4 models that show that we can include this psychological cost of lying in the utility functions, and trying to understand and trying to make sense why people are not lying as a typical econ will expect. And I want to show you 2 main paradigms for studying lying on the lab. Sorry for if I'm just repeating something that you already know. I will be quick, but I want to make a point here, I promise. So these deception games were the first one in which there is a sequential game and the experimenter knows the state of the world, communicates to the first participant, and the first participant have incentive to deceive a second participant. In this type of games, senders may, or they found that senders don't lie, and maybe because of social signaling, because they don't want to appear dishonest in the eyes of the experimenter, and also in the eyes of the second participant. I mean, the first participant doesn't want to be like perceived as dishonest for these 2 observers. But also could be because the sender, the first participant, the one that need one or has incentive to deceive the second one, also could have self-signaling, because it means they believe that they are honest people and feel bad if they, in a way, don't behave as they think they are. They are not consistent with the self-image they have. After that, we have the most famous game online, that is the die roll paradigm. And in the die roll paradigm, there is more room to social signaling, because experimenter is not seeing the state of the world, that I will refer during this presentation as the random draw. So as long as the experimenter doesn't know the random draw, participants may lie, but not at the full extent. So I want to make another precision here. I will refer lies at the full extent in a die roll game when they report the maximizing, like the 6. Imagine that the payoff is €1 if report 1, 2 if report 2, and so on until 6 if they report 6. So to me, a full extent lie is the one when they report 6, and when I will refer to partial lines, I'm referring mainly when they report 5. It's a bit simplification of partial line, but let's assume that my measure is when they report 5. So the econ modeling would suggest everyone reports 6, that there is not that much, even a lot of people report 5 and other numbers. And one reason we argue is that there is social signaling happening there. They want to show that they report 5 when they could report 6, so maybe they are saying the truth. This is with the typical line experiment with the die roll game. Our question on this paper is how possibilities of social signaling one's honesty affect lines in cheating games. And we want also to know whether observability affects more women than men. We will vary the observability of the random draw and the observability of the report. And I want to show you already like the experimental design. So our baseline, we will call basic here, has some variations on the typical one in order to allow us to make the other treatments. First, participants enter to the lab. They have in the desk, on their desk, they have the instructions, a dice, an envelope with 6 2-euro coins, and a piece of paper where they will report the die roll. So in basic, they roll a die, report a piece of paper, take the money from the envelope, and go to the next room and show to the experimenter the report and the leftovers or the other coins, or if there is no coins, no coins. So this is a way that the experimenter will know the report, but will not know the random draw. And given that we double check that the report is consistent with the money left on the envelope, there is not possibility of a steal or something like that. So this is the basic, and it's pretty similar to the standard die roll game. The only difference is the envelope beforehand with the money. Yeah. So in the observed treatment, that is we have 4 treatments plus the baseline. On the observed treatment, it's very literal what we mean by observed, because the experimenter stand up behind, or she's behind the person rolling the die, see when the first participant rolled the die, and we instructed that they can only roll the die when she is behind them. So it's common knowledge that she is looking into the die roll, but there is no record on that. In fact, it's not possible to us to know whether they lie or not. It's just they are observed when rolling the die, and all the rest is the same. On top of that, we included a super observed treatment. And the super observed treatment was exactly the observed one, but now the experimenter that stand up behind take note of the die roll. It's a really extreme case. And in this case, we wanted to take to the extreme to prove our hypothesis. So here, or the purpose of these 2 treatments are that from basic to observe, the observability increases the probability that the experimenter knows the true random draw, but the probability is not 1. So it should decrease lying, and it should decrease partial lying, and it should increase full extent lying, or conditional lying. More people will report 6s. However, in the super observed, now it's not possible to social signal in anything. It's not possible to have a reputational advantage, because once they report, they can, or the experimenter can know whether they are saying the truth or not. So reporting a 5, imagine the following situation. One person have a 4 as a random draw, but they report a 5. What is the rationale behind that? There is no rationale behind that. or not in the normal models that exist, because it's not for reputation, because this person is already a liar, and it's also not maximizing the monetary payoff. So here there is not really consistency in terms of either social signaling or self-signaling, because it's already a liar and is not taking even advantage of the lie. So this is the idea on this design, on this side of the design. In the other side of the design, we will go to double-blind experiments. So now they don't go to the experimenter, as I show you here, but we put a box at the end or at the entry and exit of the lab. And that's the reason of the envelopes in the other treatments, to keeping everything constant. So we have these envelopes with coins. They fill the report, put it inside the envelope, and close the envelope and put it in the box. So here it's impossible to know the random draw or the report. We have no information on that. And we also run a check, I would call it like a control treatment, or like a robustness control treatment, that it was a super double blind. In this super double blind is exactly a double blind procedure, but in the double blind, they had like the 12, the 6 2-euro coins, but we were concerned after running the treatment that maybe there is a problem, because if you take all the 6 coins, when you put the envelope will be empty, and maybe one sound, or because of the weight or something like that, and they will be concerned of that. So we just put another 6 fake coins there, that they know that they were just metal coins, to make some weight and noise. We wanted to rule out the possibility that it's because it's signaling that the envelope was empty. I don't know if there is any question on the experimental design, or I will show you the results. Okay. So we ran this last year. We had 696 participants, and it lasted like 30 minutes in total, and we ran it here in Berlin when we did experiments on labs. And so what were our results? First, average report. First, I want you to notice that there is huge average reports. Like, these people is lying a lot in all treatments. Like, the benchmark under truth telling should be here where I start the graph. And even these ones are lying. So even though in this treatment people are lying, that this was a bit surprising to us. And I also want to notice that the observability of the random draw impact the average report, but not the observability of the report. So it seems that they are not really caring about the observability of that the experimenter is observing them here, but they are more caring whether it's possible that the experimenter can infer that they are liars or not. And yeah.
What is on your y-axis again?
Sorry?
What does your y-axis show again?
Average
so what are these
report.
3.5? Average report of?
Of die rolls. Yes? Okay. So I show you now histograms. basically similar information, but now I wanted to show you that these average reports are mainly because there is more full extent lies on the basic and double blinds, but there is no really much of this happening on observed treatment. And this is consistent with all the models of lying, but only the left part. And I want to take 1 minute here, and we are really, like, it's really surprising for the models that, okay, when they can know if I am liar or not, I won't report, or I won't lie that much in partial lying. However, one result that is we don't really, or we are trying to making like the conjectures of what it happens, is that in super double blind, as you can notice, there are people reporting 5. And this is significant different from the uniform, or for what we would expect in under truth studying, I mean. And for us, that's surprising, and for the literature, it's surprising because there is no rationale behind it. Imagine you draw a 4. If the experimenter is not observing your random draw or your report, if you decide to lie, you should go for the full extent lie to take advantage of the highest payoff. If you report 5, the models say people report 5 because there are social signaling that they are honest. But here it's impossible to match my report with my identity. So I don't know, and I will, that my time is almost done. So I want, if any of you have some good stories, we have some ideas. First idea is maybe it could be some ceiling effect, and that could explain why they are so similar, basic double blind and super double blind, but doesn't explain partial lying. Other stories that these people, like the basic, like the normal treatment is already taking preferences of people, like preference for lying, and double blind doesn't change these preferences that much. So they are trusting enough on basic. But as I said, if you have an alternative explanation of that, I will be happy to hear it. And finally, on average, if I pull the data, women report, women lie less, let's say, report lower numbers. But this is mainly because of last treatments. So we were saying, oh, maybe there is an interaction between observability and gender, but at the end, when we do interaction effects, and this is not, it's just, there is nothing happening really on gender in terms of observability interacts. No, that doesn't interact with gender in our experiment. So I want to show you that, to wrap up, that here, when people are observed and the experimenter take note of the random draw, even in this extreme case, there is some people that still lying. So it's a bit counterintuitive on all these efforts of some researchers to deliver in really anonymity. And also shows that when we compare the normal one, the standard die roll game, with the double blind, doesn't change that much, which also shows that we are pretty close delivering anonymity, and we are taking into consideration already in the big literature the preference for lying, maybe. We find some support of the social signaling motivation, but it's mainly when the experimenter observe the random draw. And yeah, the more striking result is why we're still having people lying partially when it's double blind. So thank you so much. I'm happy to have your questions, and if you have comments, I'm really happy to hear your conjectures on our striking result.
Should we just ask the question, or is somebody going to chat? So I have one thing. In terms of your super observed treatment, one other thing that came to my mind while you were speaking was the crowding out effect, or the introduction of an additional observer usually crowds out the intrinsic effect. And there is some other literature on this, on corruption. I do also remember a paper, an experimental paper on corruptibility of group decisions. So when you introduce an additional observer or an additional person into the mix of decision making, that makes it worse rather than making it better. So that may explain some of the results in the super observed treatment, but I do not know much about the double blind.
Yeah, but in the super observed, we don't have really that much problems. If I can show you, here in the super observed, blues are the reported and the others are blues are the random draws and the other is reported. Here is perfect. Those who lie to the full extent. So there are not partial lies there. And that's consistent with the story of social signaling. Here, the problem is not that much here. The problem, or what we are trying to understand, that is this right side part. Thank you.
Are there any more questions for Daniel?
Okay.
Could I just give a quick comment on the super double blind treatment?
Yes, please.
Just because I'm also running a game at the moment which manipulates kind of the observability of the lie. And even just from asking people, or well, okay, giving them a chance to explain themselves, people have just been completely kind of irrational with how observed they feel. So people have said, well, we suspected there would be cameras, and we suspected that, even when we made it absolutely completely clear that no one could observe them, that there is some kind of irrationality to do with it, I think, which, yeah, I think it's going to be completely difficult to completely eliminate that.
So you mean that for double blind?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, that's helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Daniel.
Yeah.
And the second presenter in our session is going to be Matej from Macquarie Graduate School of Management.
Okay. All right, thank you very much. I'm going to present our research titled Hidden Inefficiency, Strategic Inflations of Project Schedules. It was a research project done with my lovely supervisors, now co-workers, co-authors, Mars Servatka and Laila Zhang. And at the beginning, I invite you to think about the scenario. Imagine you are an expert, say in a company, and you are really the only person that is qualified to do some sort of important job, and your boss approaches you and says, here is what we need to do. I don't know exactly what it is, but I know the result. I know where we need to get, and you're the only person that is capable of getting us there. So can you do it? And you, of course, you said yes. And the second question you will probably be asked by your supervisor or boss is, okay, so how long is it going to take you? And imagine that your best estimate, you have done it a couple of times before, so you know exactly that it will take you a month. What are you going to say to your supervisor? Are you going to say a month? Well, maybe if you're like myself, you're going to say something different, maybe 2 months, maybe 3 months, right? To get some free time, to get to reduce your work pace, to reduce stress, to get some time from potential procrastination, and so on and so on. And if that happens, the second question would be, what would have to happen in order for you to tell the truth? And it seems to me that it's quite obvious that the answer to that question boils down to incentives. So this is research about incentives. A very similar scenario happened to me a while ago. Before I enrolled in PhD, I was actually a project manager. So I was on the other side of this. I was managing projects, and mostly there were internal projects in quite a big company. And we had some good ones and some bad ones. Some went well and some didn't well so well. But then again, we were almost always struggling with time, struggling with our schedules. Sometimes on those projects, I need to hire an external contractor, so somebody from the outside of the company, somebody with a really specific expertise. And very often, that person was basically the only one in the market, in the local market, that was suitable for that kind of a job, something we need to get done. And after a while, I noticed that those contractors were really great at their schedules. I mean, they were delivering their projects exactly on the agreed milestones, exactly on the agreed deadlines. And it got me thinking, like, they're great. How are they doing that? Are they better than us or what? And after a while of admiration of those guys, I realized that maybe they're not better than us. Maybe they're just lying to us. Maybe what they do is that instead of telling us the truth, they are inflating the estimates because they know we have no way to verify how much effort do they actually need to put into those projects. And then once the time estimate is inflated, and obviously the budget is inflated as well, and then they take their time, they take their budget, and then deliver exactly at the deadline. So it got me thinking about successful and unsuccessful projects. It's common perception that when the project is over budget or late, it's deemed unsuccessful. But does that really mean that if the project is on time, it is successful? Well, maybe not. Maybe it was just a project with inflated schedule and took longer than it should. And this is very hard to spot, and that is why we call it a hidden efficiency. So the problem here we are dealing in this research is that the project estimation execution is traditionally and basically all the time being done by the same person or the same team or the same company, which is obviously a situation that invites moral hazard. It's very similar to a principal agent problem in budgeting, but we are looking at this from duration estimation perspective. A very nice quote that I found in the budgeting literature. I would like to read it. At times, the estimate is not estimate at all, but just a reflection of maximum time that is believed to be still acceptable by the project customer. And this is where I got really interested, and this is where we started this project and derived the conjectures. So the conjectures in terms of time dimension that we are exploring in this research, the first one, the incentive structure that is aimed at increasing the estimation accuracy, right? If you give your planners, the guys that execute the project, incentives to be accurate in their estimation, Well, you may as well trigger strategic inflation of estimates, inflated schedules, and then subsequently prolonged or slower project or task execution. And how to deal with it? Well, as I said earlier, it all comes down to incentives. Well, if the estimation accuracy incentives, right, getting your project done on time, trigger this inflation, then how we can deflate this? And our conjecture was that maybe we can deflate it by adding speed incentives, right? So not only accuracy, but also speed. So the faster you are, the more money I will give you. The more there is to grab from you from this project. And since, as I already mentioned, this inflation, this kind of behavior is very difficult to identify in a happenstance business data. That is because if the project is finished on time, you basically have no idea whether the estimate was genuinely accurate, the schedule was genuinely accurate, or it was an inflated schedule with deliberately slow progress. So because of this difficulty, we conduct a laboratory experiment in order to uncover the possible hidden efficiency and also the possible remedy to this inefficiency. So the project our subjects are facing is really a very simple real effort task. What they do is they see this table consisting of 100 cells. Each cells contain either the letter S or the number 5, and their task is very simple: to check all the cells that contain the letter S, while leaving the other cells unchecked, and then submit the table for verification. And if the table is checked correctly, they are done with the task. So the actual task is not one table, but 5 tables, right? So 5 distinct tables. In each of them, they do the very same thing. And importantly, we repeat the task for 3 times, right? So they do first estimate how long it's going to take them to finish the first round. That is 5 tables, and then they do it. Then they get feedback, and then we say, okay, now the second round, you do exactly the same thing. Obviously, a little bit different tables, but basically the same thing. And then they do it for the 3rd time. And then at the end of the day, and the experiment, we pay for one randomly selected round. We have our subjects complete one practice table at the beginning that is not payoff relevant, right? Just to get them some experience. And importantly, we give them something that we call time measuring tool. So the time measuring tool is not really a clock, it's that a little box on their screen that shows how much time has already elapsed from the start of their task. Importantly, this is not updated automatically. This is only updated once the subject clicks the little update button, right? So if they want to control themselves, if they want to behave strategically, we know about it. We know whether and when they check the elapsed time and whether they adjust their progress in order to deliver at the time they estimate. In terms of manipulation, we have 2 conditions, and we change the incentive structure from one round to another. So we have 2 conditions, one we call ABA condition and the second we call BAB condition. And what those letters stand for? Well, A stands for accuracy only incentives, right? So if you are performing the task, the round under A condition, that means that you only get paid for accuracy, which is kind of straightforward. The more accurate your estimate is, the more money you earn. I think that the maximum or spot on estimate is like $20, and every second of inaccuracy, either in both directions, reduces your earnings by 10 cents. So that means if your estimate is only like 10 seconds off your actual work time, then you earn $1 less. So it's kind of a sharp penalty. In B, we use both accuracy and speed incentives. So the accuracy incentives stay the same, while we also introduce the speed incentives. They are, again, very straightforward. The speed incentives only depend on your actual task duration. So the longer you take to finish the task, then the less money you earn. why we do that, ABA, BAB, why we change the incentives from one to another? It's because we want to be able to show both across subject as well as within subject comparison of behavior under different incentive structures. So our hypothesis. The first hypothesis is that once the task is being performed under the incentive structure A, it will result in higher estimates than the incentive structure B, right? If it's only accuracy that counts, we expect the subject to, make sure that they will get their estimate right. So inflate them a little bit. So basically tell us a little more that they need a little more time than they actually know they do. The second hypothesis that follows from that is that subjects will actually take longer to finish under incentive structure A than under B, right? So if there are no speed incentives in place, I inflate my estimate and then I make sure I finish on that estimate. Whereas, while if there are both A and B incentives, so both accuracy and speed incentives, then in that case, you want to still be accurate in estimation, but you want to try to be, I'm not saying as fast as possible, but you definitely want to be a little quicker. And the final one is speaks directly to the strategic behavior. And we believe that in each round, subjects will take longer to solve the fifth table than to solve an average table from the first four, right? So remember, in each round there are 5 tables, and we expected that they just go through the first 4 as quickly as they could, and then they start playing on the last one, right? So maybe slower than the progress, or just outright wait, right? Have the table prepared and wait to press the submit button at the right time. And here are the results. So in terms of mean estimates, in the ABA condition, what we would expect is that the middle bar, the red bar, would be the lowest, and it actually is. While in the BAB condition, we would expect the middle bar to be highest, and it also actually is. The situation is not so clear in terms of actual duration. It's very same for round 2 and round 3, but as you can see in round 1, the duration is longer than any other round, and we believe that this goes on the account of learning effects, right? So in round 1, they were not as much efficient in terms of completing the tables. They sometimes missed some essays or check some files, and they realize, yeah, that was a mistake. And once they figure out how to perform the task, the second and the third round, the actual duration is in the direction that we expect. Here is another look. Here is look at the same, but from the individual level. So each point represents one subject. Interestingly, in here you can see that in the first round in ABA condition, right? So over here there is some overestimation, or the overestimation is more prevalent, whereas in a BAB condition where the speed mattered in the first round, there is a lot of underestimation, which is very consistent with the previous literature. However, once they figure out, okay, I know exactly how long it will take me, in the following 2 rounds, they are most of the time very close or right at their estimate, right? So the red line basically means that the estimate is right where the actual duration is. And maybe it's not that visible from this figure, but in the rounds where the speed money do not play a role, so in this case, this one and this one, they are moving their estimates a little bit towards the right end. That means their estimate a little bit more. And probably the most convincing figure I have in this presentation is this one. So we recorded, for each subject, we recorded how long it took them to complete the individual table, right? So as you can see, the important ones are the orange ones, right? So these are the first 4 ones, and here the orange one is the last one in the round. And again, the second round, 4, and the 5th one, and so on. And based on our hypothesis, we would expect that the middle bar in a BA condition in which speed matters would be the lowest here and the highest here, and exactly what we see, right? So here is only the accuracy that counts. Here is the speed, and they are trying to be faster, and they actually know what they're doing. And here it is the opposite way around. Here the speed matters, but here it doesn't. Obviously, we have also some quantitative support for our results. This is the fixed effect regression that shows that when the task is being performed under incentive structure A, it indeed induces higher estimates and longer time to finish the task. It's very obvious on the last table. So the last fifth table takes, subject take much longer to finish the last table than under incentive structure B. And also importantly, this is another behavioral aspect we're looking at. They check the time more often. So when the speed doesn't matter, it's only accuracy that counts. They really make sure that they're finished on time. What is also very important here is that middle column, estimation accuracy. Basically, it says that the incentive structure has no effect on estimation accuracy. And what that means is that if we incentivize those guys to be fast, so we give them both speed and accuracy incentives, they are faster, but this does not compromise the estimation accuracy. They are still very accurate in their estimation, right? So they are able to gain, to get to both goals at the same time. So to wrap up the results, what we found is that subjects do provide higher estimates and then complete the task slower when the accuracy is incentivized, but the speed is not. We also find support for deliberative inflation, so they do deliberately, deliberately inflate their estimates, they know exactly what they're doing, and then subsequently take longer or outright wait by the end of the task. They pace themselves so that their actual task duration matches their estimate. And finally, they take longer to figure out the estimate when facing both incentive structure or two incentive structure at the same time. So we also measured how long it took them to provide the estimate. And it's clear from our data that they think more about what they should do, what their strategy should be when they are facing both incentives at the same time. And a last piece of result is that once the task is underway, subjects, when facing only accuracy, check the elapsed time more often, more frequently. So they're really, letting us know, basically, even though they don't know they're letting us know, but they're letting us know that they are really focused on hitting that target. In terms of discussion, well, there are some limitations of our study, obviously. Maybe the major one is that we do not incorporate the trade-off between additional cost, that is additional remuneration from the speed incentives, and additional revenues. Obviously, we are saying that in order to, the speed incentives help, but then again, from the company perspective or from the organizational perspective, they only help if they are lower than what can be gained from a faster project completion. Our environment also abstracts from strategic considerations of project owners. So we don't have a manager there that would, be able to refuse the proposal that seemed to be inflated. However, that's kind of a realistic assumption that in many cases the managers don't know that much about what needs to be done than their subordinates. So very often they will just rely on them. And finally, the last limitation is that, of course, the hidden efficiency can also be reduced by introducing some competition amongst potential suppliers. Then again, this option may not always be viable, especially for internal projects and organizations. So the implication from our study is that when you are really trying to have your projects be successful, that means being done on schedule, and you start rewarding the estimation accuracy, what can happen is that you can induce a hidden inefficiency. You can induce a deliberate inflation of schedules and this slower project progress. And once you align the objectives of you as a project owner with those of your planners, you can get more compressed, but still accurate and reliable project schedules, right? And accelerated project delivery. So the project is still delivered on time, but it's delivered faster. So this is kind of a good news, I believe. All right, so that's all I have. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Okay, I guess there are no questions.
Can I ask something?
Absolutely.
Hello. I don't know if you can see me. Anyways, I just wanted to know, where do you place your study? Like, it's not clearly lying and deception to me. Maybe more credence good. To which literature does this speak?
Yeah, very good question. It's not directly lying. Yes, I totally agree. So we are trying to position it into managerial journals, managerial perspective. But then again, you're right that we are not really talking about lying exactly. We're more in the direction of moral hazard here.
Yeah, I would place it more to credence good, and I think maybe you check this literature and see. I think you complement nicely some papers there. So,
okay, that's a very good suggestion. Thank you very much.
yeah.
Okay, is there some other question? I believe I still have half a minute. That's good timing, not inflated, I believe. Okay, if not, thank you very much for your attention, and I'm looking forward to the rest of the presentations in this session.
Thank you, Matej. And then the next presenter in this session is going to be Lutfi from the University of Exeter.
Trying to unmute myself. Okay. You can all see my screen, right? Perfect. Probably it's not lying or deception straightforward, this paper too, but somehow I am in this session. So the ultimate question we're asking in this paper, which was part of my PhD thesis, is how far will you go to get your way? And we're specifically looking at bribery. To motivate the idea to begin with, a definition of corruption that has been used over and over again in the economics literature is abuse of interested power for private gain. Essentially, corruption is a social dilemma or a strategic dilemma or decision-making at the very core of it. Assuming that corruption has a negative externality and given the fact that corruption is widespread in most countries with low income and a very, very timely bureaucracy, so corruption in a way greases the wheels of a slow bureaucracy, that versus to some sort of or type of negative externality that you may incur by engaging in a corrupt transaction. So there are two questions that I look at in this experiment. First is the negative externality effects within the corruption games, and the second is the effect of introducing a legal channel or a legal fee that people could choose to avoid paying bribes, so to speak. In so many ways, bribery in high perceived corrupt countries mirrors some form of a premium that we pay in other countries that is legal. So corruption is a big challenge, and it contributes, so I hope what we find contributes to the policy reforms in this sense, that if a fast-track option is introduced into the public service delivery, then that should lower corruption in some ways. Maybe not eliminated it completely, but to some extent. So specifically speaking, in the experiment, I look at harassment, bribery, or bribes. The harassment bribes is defined as aggravation of citizens by a public official by manipulating the delivery of the service, the timing of the service delivery. So you want to go and get a passport. That would be a very simple application. So let's say you want to get your passport, they delay the process of this application until you pay some sort of bribe to receive the service that you're entitled for free otherwise. So this is specifically what we talk about when we're talking about harassment briberies. And there are several applications of such a bribery or harassment bribery. You can pay to skip a long queue. The backstory of it is that while I was doing my PhD in the UK, I needed to apply for an Afghan passport because I am from Afghanistan as well. And this happened firsthand where I had three options: either go through a normal route of waiting 3 weeks in order to get my passport, or pay somebody $100 and get it on the same day, which was illegal, and there was no fast track option available to pay legally to get my passport quickly. However, in the UK, this is available. If you pay £77, you get your passport the next day, or £177, you would get it in the next 3 hours. Otherwise, in a standard normal waiting time, you would have to wait 3 weeks to get your passport received. So harassment bribery does exist within the structure of administrations, and it can be used in several other instances, like avoiding court summons, escaping speeding tickets, for example, or evading taxes, or averting legal certifications. You know, one of the most common ones is the council extension permissions for houses. That is a very long process in the UK, and if you want to build a little bit of extension to your house, you have to wait 2 years. So these sorts of harassment briberies could be used to speed up the process. So this provided some sort of motivation to do an experiment on the topic. And the second motivation came from the corruption games that exists already or studies corruption within the literature. So what you see in this graph is in the corruption game is an individual who has a choice to either not offer a bribe to a public official or do offer a bribe to a public official. So assuming B is 0, and I hope you guys can see this because it's a very small image. So you pay no bribes, then the public official either overlooks or doesn't overlook. So either they continue with the process normally, or they don't. Alternatively, if you do pay a bribe, let's say between 1 to 200, whatever the currency is, then the public official has 4 other options. And the burden automatically, experimentally speaking, gets passed on to the second person. So assuming this is a game and it's played by two subjects, the responsibility to carry the burden of the negative externality, the responsibility to determine what is going to happen is passed on to the next person. And this creates a couple of issues. It creates conditional cooperation, creates negative reciprocity in the case of a negative action. So most of the games that I have in the literature that I have reviewed for this purpose employs some sort of this type of modified trust game, if you like. And this is what I call lopsided structures or games, or a dynamic framework. And these dynamic frameworks have some inherent biases, and it causes issues in studying harassment bribery question. Another thing they have all in common is the way externality or the negative externality is modeled. So experimentally, this is modeled through losses in monetary payoffs. So most games, when there is a transaction, negative transaction or corrupt transaction taking place between two people, some other person in the experiment incurs a loss from their monetary payoff. And that, while being important and being one manifestation of corruption or bribery, I believe that delaying or aggravating citizens or delaying the timing of the process is also another type of harassment that takes place within this context that has not been covered. So with two of these issues in mind and the motivation, we come up with a simple, a very straightforward corruption design, and we try to look at harassment bribery. So before going into the design, I'm going to present to you the findings. Finding number one is introducing a more expensive legal channel significantly lowers supply of bribes via citizens. I find that people are willing to pay to get their way in order to fasten up the process, but they're also willing to pay to keep within the bounds of the law. So they also pay for the legal service. Finally, they are willing to pay to avoid harming other people. And that is something that, whether that is monetary costs or non-monetary costs, in the case of our design, it's specifically non-monetary cost, and that's just waiting time. So people are willing to incur a personal cost in order to avoid harming other people. And we observe these three behaviors. In addition, I also find that beliefs are strong predictors of engagement in bribery or paying the legal fee. I also find that female subjects exhibit higher aversion to any preferential treatment, being the fee or the bribe, compared to male subjects. And finally, our subject pool consisted of students and non-students, 50% students, 50% non-students. So students pay less bribes, predict less bribery, and engage in it less than non-students. So those are the main findings. Now the experimental, so the literature review, the first question in terms of the policies in this literature is that lowering monitoring costs within each administration should reduce bribery, should reduce corruption in any form or any shape, including harassment bribery. So that is one of the major suggestions, and a number of policies that have been put forward follows that very principle. So the second thing that is very interesting is encouraging whistleblowing. So there is a dynamic between the briber and the bribee, and there is also an incentive for for them to stay quiet. And there are two guys who, Basu especially, he proposed that we should create an asymmetric system by making it legal for the person who pays the bribe, so that encourages whistleblowing. So that breaks that incentive to stay silent. A number of policies have been proposed based on this principle, but this causes a number of other issues that I will not get into at the moment. The last three policies that have been looked at experimentally are the following. So 4I principle, this is the introduction of one additional public official into the decision-making mix. So let's say there is a public official who has to make a decision regarding some transaction. You introduce another pair of eyes. These guys find that that leads to more corruption, sadly. And staff rotation is a very interesting policy that has been implemented in Germany. Every 2 years or 4 years, federal agents are rotated to a different department within the federal government, so that breaks the reciprocity that's established between the clients and the staff and the officials. So this was also experimented in Greece very recently. That shot up the revenue of the government a lot until it plateaus again because they will form new clienteles. Anyway, and the last policy was implemented in Singapore, rewarding the honest behavior. So that was every time if a bribe was proposed to a public official, if the public official reported it, he or she receives the bonus, and that also had a positive impact. So our paper kind of speaks to this literature by introducing a fast-track service system, basically, which mirrors bribery. This is also practiced in so many countries. Sadly, there isn't any experimental papers or studies that have looked at it. So that's what we're going to do. In terms of the corrupt or unethical and versus ethical decision making, this paper talks to a number of different literatures. I will not review every single one of them, but I will speak about them as I go along in the experimental design. The last thing is the negative externality itself. So there are two paradigms within the corruption games. One is a Benketel who does not find that a negative externality has an effect on bribery rate, whereas Barr and Sarah is the second paper, or the second initial paper, seminal paper, that do find a negative externality effect. So as a result of these two papers, then a number of other contributions have taken place, and still there are contradictory results that come out. And the novelty of our paper is that we do not, the negative externality that we have in the experiment is just delaying the timing of the delivery of the service, rather than making them face a monetary loss. So our paper also speaks to this literature. So procedures. We manipulate the timing of payments. So payments are the actual payments that participants receive in the experiment while they're taking part, as a proxy for a free service that they are entitled for free. So they take part in an experiment, they spend some time, and they earn some amount of money. And then that is their money, and we prime them so many times during the experiment. And then we ask them, they have 3 different options with 3 different consequences in order to receive that payment that they are entitled to, that they have been promised. So we run a willingness to pay pilot at the very beginning using a multiple price risk list. That is to figure out the cost of the bribe and the fee. I will allude to this in a bit. So in the main experiment, this experiment was done online, and the sample size was 600 students and non-students and professionals from mostly 5 different countries, Greece, Mexico, Austria, Hungary, and Poland. So the main experiment was like this. So they would enter, they would do a real effort task. The real effort task was just some pointless task we assigned. They had to type in 4-character numbers and letter sequence and get it right 20 times in order to earn a lump sum of £1.50. And we chose that because it matches the minimum wage to the UK. So the entire duration of the experiment was only 10 minutes. So that matches the minimum wage. And then once they earned, we kept repeating and priming them during this period that they have earned their money. And the idea of the real effort task was also to make sure that they got that idea through, because it was crucial in the second part of it. And then they realized that, okay, we have earned this money. Now we have 3 ways of getting it: default, or pay a bribe, or pay a fee. So the default delivery mechanism involved 11 days of waiting. So you would choose by default, you would wait 11 days in order to receive what you have earned in this experiment. However, you had the option to bribe. To determine the cost of that bribe, we had already done that pilot with the willingness to pay. So the cost was determined to be 6 pence. So comparing to the total lump sum that they had, 6 pence is a good percentage, but if you look at it in terms of the actual reality, it's not a lot of money, but we still have effects. So we still do see a lot of treatment effects. And then in some treatments where we introduced the legal fee, which was 50% more expensive than the bribe, which also came out of the WTP pilot, which was 9p in actual terms. So we had 3 treatments. Default was present in all the treatments. So bribery was present in all the treatments. In the first treatment, we didn't have the fast track option, but in the last 2 treatments, we did have the fast track option. And then the first 2 treatments had the negative externality and the last one didn't. So this was done to allow us to form our hypothesis that I'm going to state in a bit. The experiment was repeated only once. It was between subject design. There was no risk of, sorry for the typo in here, there was no risk of detection. We assumed that harassment bribery is negligible in countries where bribery is widespread. So the risk of getting caught and being punished is minimal, therefore we resorted to that. We did not use a neutral language, so we fully used the word bribe, the word fee in all of the treatments consistently. So there are 2 things. If there are effects, those effects are present and consistent across all the treatments. That shouldn't matter. And the second rationale for that was that if you're paying a bribe, you know that you're paying a bribe. So there is no subtle language. Whatever language you use, PD money or facilitation money or whatever, but you know the intention well in advance that you are paying a bribe in order to gain some sort of favorable treatment. The sample was recruited using the Prolific platform, and after our exclusion restriction, which was countries with GDP of less than $35,000, GDP per capita of less than $35,000, in 2019, we had 6,500 members left to choose from. We also elicited beliefs. This was incentivized. This was done after they had made their decision in how they wanted to be paid. So after the experiment, we elicited beliefs, and this was incentivized. Then we had a survey of 3 questions, and the answers to these survey questions serve as anecdotes as why they made the decisions that they did. Which brings in the behavioral aspect of or contributions of the paper. We collected the 10 item big 5 and a demographic large data set that comes with Prolific that includes nationality, first language, country of residence, employment status, age, etc., etc. So we collect all of those. With that, our hypothesis. So subjects, first of all, subjects will choose to pay bribes less when there is a fast track system available, although it is a little bit more expensive. So if there is a legal channel to pay, we predicted that people will pay. They will avoid paying bribes. Second hypothesis, subjects will pay bribes less when there is a negative externality. So even if that negative externality is manipulating the timing of somebody's payoff rather than making them lose their payoff. So hypothesis number 3 was that subjects will choose the fast track option when a negative externality is attached to paying bribes. And then the last 2 is that there is a positive correlation between predictions and actual engagement or actual decisions. That is whether bribery or paying the fee. So people who predicted or guessed So we asked people, what do you think, how many people, what percentage of people will engage in bribery? And then we find that there is a positive correlation. We hypothesize at the moment that there is a positive correlation between that prediction and the number of people who engaged in the actual bribery, as well as the fee. So, summary statistics, I run the parametric, non-parametric tests for comparison purposes. So there is no significant differences to worry about. The groups or the treatments are comparable to each other on several dimensions. Then here is our first observation. So now we are looking at bribery, so that's the blue bars. The first observation is that bribery is lower in LFNE treatment. That is the one where there is a negative externality and there is a legal fee available. So there is a fast track of legal fee available and the negative externality exists. In the first treatment, there is no legal fee available, so they can only choose default or bribe. Now, we can see that bribery drops from 22% to 6%. The support of this, I do a Fisher's exact test that shows significance. There is a positive significant coefficient when I run a probit regression, which is at the end of the presentation, the end of this the slides. So that is the margins, and it survives the test of significance. So there is strong evidence that when you introduce a legal channel or a premium, people will pay to avoid bribing. So our first result is that less subjects pay bribes when fast track option is available. As a discussion, out of those answers to the survey at the very end of the experiment, two independent, myself and the co-author, we categorized, and a third observer, we categorized all of the answers of the participants into different categories. So these they ended up being categorized between 9 to 8 different categories, where we call rationalizers, empathizers, and a couple of other categories. So, and we use those answers or those anecdotes to inform some of the explanations or the reasons for the results. So, of all of those people who paid the fee, most of them rationalized that this was just, and that's why they were paying. So they tried to rationalize. So we defined all those rationalizers as people who show some sort of conflict in their decision. They're not happy about it, but they also paid. That being less important, there are 3 different types of effects that may be taking place when this transaction or when maybe this decision is happening. A framing effect, that would be the bribe and the fee. So in the case of the bribe, it would be in favor of the fast track option, or in the case of the fee, it would be in the favor of bribe. But all of those are consistent across different treatments. So we assume that shouldn't matter.
Excuse me, I'm really sorry to interrupt. Your time is actually up, so maybe you could try and wrap up.
Sure. I'm going to skip the discussions and move on to the results. So the negative externality result, we find that subjects engage in bribery less when there is a negative externality attached to their decisions or to the transaction. This was hypothesized as well, and we have registered most of our hypotheses before doing the experiment. So secondly, the third hypothesis, subjects choose fast track option more when a negative externality is associated to bribe. We also find treatment effects for that. And that is the main findings of the paper. Then we find that predictions are positively correlated to actual engagement, and there is enough sufficient evidence for that or support for that from our experimental data. I find that predictions about paying the fee is positively correlated to actually paying the fee, and there is sufficient evidence for that in the experimental data. And student decisions are less corrupt. They predict lower rates of bribery and fees and non-student subjects compared to non-student subjects. And I find enough sufficient support for this in the experimental data. So I'm going to skip all the values and all of that. So that is there. It's all robust. We have done all the robustness checks and the significance tests, and they all survive the parametric, non-parametric robustness checks. I may have missed the slide. I also find that female subjects exhibit an aversion to both type of preferential treatment, and they say that it's unfair in their anecdotal responses. So they chose both of them less than male subjects in our experiment. So with that, I'm going to stop, and if there are any questions, please do ask. I'm sorry about going over time.
So thank you. Any questions? Okay, so then I'll share my screen. Okay, so I'm going to present a paper today called Do Just Desserts in Competition Shape Patterns of Cheating? And in this paper, I'm going to analyze the effect of the source and size of income on cheating in a tax environment, and examine whether the pattern of cheating can be explained by the fairness ideal of just desserts. So the question, what constitutes a fair distribution of resources, has been an object of fierce debate and has produced a lot of different opinions and fairness ideals. One very prominent fairness ideal is the fairness ideal of just desserts, or also named liberal egalitarianism. And according to this idea, the reasons for inequalities are relevant for fair distribution of resources. And particularly, this idea would distinguish between inequalities resulting from factors beyond individual control, such as luck or chance, and factors within individual control, such as effort, performance, or choices. And inequalities resulting from factors beyond individual control are deemed not justified and should therefore be equalized through redistribution. On the other hand, inequalities resulting from factors within individual control are deemed justified and should therefore not be equalized through redistribution. And the literature finds quite a lot of support for this notion of just desserts. For example, there are several papers that argue that different perceptions of the degree to which income inequalities depend on effort or on luck can help explain differences between the United States and Europe in the extent of the welfare state. And also there are many experiments that show that subjects tend to redistribute according to responsibility. And finally, there are also many experiments that show that earned income creates entitlements and that these entitlements are generally respected. So the above mentioned evidence shows quite a bit of support for this ideal of just desserts. And the question that I ask in my paper is whether this principle of just desserts will also be followed intrinsically when there is the possibility to gain through cheating. And I'm going to examine this in a situation in which self-serving actions can be disguised as a random event. And to do this, I'm going to vary whether the income is earned due to performance or due to luck, and whether this influenced cheating on taxes in a situation that directly influences the distribution of incomes. And my research is closely related to 3 other papers who also examine the effect of luck and performance in relation to dishonest behavior. One by also Daniel Parra, who also is a presenter in this session here. And the difference between these papers that I mention here and mine is that in these 3 papers, subjects cheat at the expense of the experimenter, whereas in my experiment, subjects cheat at the expense of other subjects and therefore directly influence the distribution of incomes. So the second thing I look at in my paper is competition. many cases, the size of an income is not only determined by people's own luck or performance, but also by also in relation to other people. So I will examine whether an intrinsic motivation for just desserts exists irrespective of whether there is competition or not. And research shows that people have a large concern for their relative earnings, status, and ranking. And therefore, it's not surprising that many papers also find that people try to improve their chances of winning a competition by cheating or sabotaging others. And finally, it has also been found that competition tends to have a general detrimental effect on subsequent prosociality. So altogether, it appears that competition induces a kind of increased focus on own individual well-being. So against this background, I asked the question whether competition will crowd out intrinsic honesty in my setting. Okay, so going straight into the experimental design, just a quick overview. The experiment consists of 3 phases: the working phase, the bonus phase, and the tax phase. In the working phase, and this is repeated for 16 rounds. In the working phase, subjects work on a real effort task consisting of the slider task, and they earn a small piece rate of 5 thalers per slider they correctly place on the number 50, as you can see here in the picture. The working time for the task varies between 80 and 40 seconds, alternates between 40 and 80 seconds. Then subjects receive a bonus, which consists either of 100, 200, 300, or 400 thalers, so it's a lot larger than the small piece rate that they can earn in the real effort task. And the determination of the bonus depends on the treatment, and I'm going to go into more detail on this in a minute. Then finally, they enter the tax phase, and in the tax phase, they have to pay taxes on the bonus. And they determine the tax rate they have to pay themselves by rolling a die under a cup. And higher numbers on the die represent higher tax rates. So they roll the die and they have to enter the corresponding tax rate into the tax declaration, and obviously this creates an incentive to cheat by reporting lower tax rates. So, a few further details, subjects play in groups of 4, and there's a random rematch of subjects each round. Taxes are redistributed evenly in the groups of 4. And importantly, subjects also receive no feedback about the tax phase until the end of the experiment. So they only receive feedback about their performance in the real effort task and the bonus that they receive. In the end, 1 round is randomly chosen to determine the payoff, and 25 thalers convert into €1 at the end of the experiment. Okay, so taking a look at the treatments. I vary treatments along 2 dimensions. The one is whether the bonus depends on luck or performance, and the other is whether there is competition or not. So starting with the non-competition treatments. In the luck treatment, each subject receives a virtual urn consisting of 4 different colored balls. Then the computer randomly draws one of the balls out of the urn, and the color on the ball determines the bonus for the subject. So in this case, the size of the bonus is independent of the performance in the real effort task and also independent of any other subjects. In the performance treatment, the bonus the subject receives is dependent on the performance in the real effort task. And there are 3 different thresholds, and depending which threshold a subject passes with their performance, they receive a bonus of 400, 300, or 200 thalers. And if they don't pass any of the thresholds, then they receive the lowest bonus of 100 thalers. So in this case, the bonus is dependent on the performance in the real effort task, but again, independent of any other subjects. And then there are also 2 treatments with competition. In the luck treatment, each group receives a virtual urn with 4 balls inside, and the computer randomly allocates 1 bonus to each subject. So in this case, again, the bonus is independent of performance in the real effort task, but dependent on other subjects, meaning that one subject's good fortune is another subject's loss. And finally, in the performance treatment, all 4 subjects are ranked according to their relative performance, with the best performing subject receiving the highest bonus and so forth. So in this case, the bonus is dependent on the performance in the real effort task and also on the other person's performance. Okay, So going into the hypotheses, in the performance treatments, inequality finds justification because it is based on a factor that is within subjects' control, so their performance or their effort in the real effort task. Therefore, I expect subjects to have no desire to equalize the payoff distribution. So subjects that earn a high bonus should feel entitled to this bonus because they exerted a lot of effort and performed well. And subjects that didn't receive, only received a low bonus should see that the other subjects are more entitled to a higher payoff than they are. So altogether, there should be no desire to equalize the payoff redistribution. And this means that subjects would cheat to the extent that the gain that they receive from cheating compensates the moral costs of cheating. And this should more strongly be the case for higher bonuses. This means that altogether, I expect the rich, or those who earn a lot of high bonus, to cheat more, and the poor to be more honest. And this is just a stylized graph that should to illustrate this. So expect the reported tax rate to be higher for lower bonuses and lower for higher bonuses in the performance treatment. Now in the luck treatments, I expect exactly the opposite, because in this case, inequality is not justified, because it is based on factors that are beyond individual controls, just a random draw. So no subject should be entitled to a higher payoff than another. Therefore, I expect subjects to aim at equalizing the payoffs through redistribution. And this would mean that it is sort of less costly for a poor subject to cheat and to report lower tax rates, and more costly for a rich subject to cheat and report higher tax rates. Because if a rich subject cheats, this would sort of counteract this aim of redistribution. Therefore, in the luck treatments, I expect the reported tax rate to increase with the bonus. So exactly the opposite. And I think, were there questions? Okay, no, sorry. Right. So this is what I expect for the performance and the luck treatments. And now coming to the competition treatments. As already said in the literature review, the general finding is that sort of competition tends to increase the focus on own individual well-being. So sort of there's a lot of evidence that subjects become more selfish in or after a competition. And therefore I expect competition to crowd out the intrinsic motivation for honesty to a certain extent. So again, looking at the stylized graph, I would expect subjects to report lower tax rates for all bonus levels in the competition treatments, but still sort of keeping the same slope as without competition. Okay. So just quickly to go through data and procedures. The experiment was conducted at the Paula Lab at the University of Passau, run with Z-Tree and recruited via ORSI. I had 12 sessions with a total of 224 subjects. The experiment lasted 50 to 60 minutes with an average payoff of €11.54, and just over half of my subject pool were female. Right, so before I go into any treatment effects, I just want to give you a quick overview of the reported tax rates. So here we can see the fraction of reported tax rates, and we can see that lower tax rates were reported more often than higher tax rates. So people seem to have cheated and reported sort of the lowest tax rate of 10%, but also 20% more often than would be statistically expected. And higher tax rates are reported less often than statistically expected. But still there is a certain level of honesty here. And this is also true looking at the mean reported tax rate for each subject. So the individual mean reported tax rate over our 16 rounds. And here we can see that only 10 subjects cheated to the full extent and reported the lowest tax rate of 10% in all rounds. All other subjects seem to have been honest to a certain extent or responsive to the circumstances and did not always cheat to the full extent, even though they knew that they could get away with it. Still, it's also important to mention that even if a subject has a mean reported tax rate of 35%, which would be statistically expected. That doesn't mean that they were entirely honest, because maybe they reported wrong tax rates for a certain task. So, but still, there is a certain amount of honesty. Okay, now taking a look at the difference between treatments. First of all, I pooled the data for the 2 performance and the 2 look treatments. And looking only at the performance treatment first. So here I expected the mean reported tax rate to decrease with the bonus. And we can see that this is actually the case. So subjects who only received a bonus of 100 were, well, they cheated a little bit, but they were fairly honest and reported a tax rate, mean reported tax rate of about 33%. And this decreases steadily until we have a mean reported tax rate of just over 27% for subjects who received a bonus of 400. So this is in line with the hypothesis. Then taking a look at the luck treatment, here expected the relation to be exactly the opposite, but we see that this is not the case. Instead, subjects reported lower tax rates for higher bonuses in the luck treatment as well. And this effect even seems to be slightly stronger than in the performance treatment. So it appears that subjects did not intrinsically follow such a justice principle of just desserts in their decision to cheat. And instead, they seem to have only taken into consideration the gain that they can get from cheating and the moral costs that this incurs. And in this case, because here higher bonuses would give a higher incentive to cheat and are more likely to compensate the moral costs. So it appears the rich cheat more, never mind why they are rich and whether they sort of are entitled to their higher income or not. And this also holds when looking at the graphs for each treatment separately. Here we can see that there is a negative relation between the mean reported tax rate and the bonus level in each treatment. Okay, then looking at the effect of competition, I expected the mean reported tax rates to be lower in the competition treatments. Again, I pool the data here for the no competition and the competition treatments. And what we can see is that there is basically absolutely no difference at all. So subjects seem to have reported basically very similar tax rates in the competition and in the no competition treatments. However, taking a look at the effect of competition for male and female subjects for the 2 subsamples gives a bit more details. So taking only a look at the male subsample, we can see that men actually reported lower tax rates in the competition treatments for all bonus levels. So men actually behaved the way that I had sort of expected in my hypothesis. However, on the aggregate level, this is balanced out by women becoming more honest under competition. So due to these sort of diverging effects, the total effect is 0. What we can also see here, though, is that the negative effect of the bonus on the reported tax rate is robust across genders as well. So men as well as women report lower tax rates for higher bonus levels. And just like Daniel, I also find that women are a bit more honest than men altogether. So to conclude, I find a substantial level of intrinsic honesty, but this honesty decreases with income. And this effect persists even when the size of income is determined by factors beyond individual control, so also in the luck treatments. So I conclude that people do not follow just desserts intrinsically in an environment in which dishonest behavior or dishonest self-serving actions are undetectable. And the behavior across treatments is best explained by weighing financial gains of cheating against the moral costs of cheating. And the effect is robust for competition and also across genders. So that was it. So thank you very much. Are there any questions?
Yeah, I have one question.
Yeah.
Or maybe 2. And why did you repeat the game?
Because, well, I wanted to have sort of between and within subject variation. So I can look at sort of whether the effect is only like between subjects who sort of received a higher or lower bonus, but also within the same subject when they received a higher and a lower bonus. And it is actually both. So it's each for sort of the subjects within a subject. Subjects seem to have reported lower tax rates for when they received a higher bonus, but also if I look at the sum of bonuses that subjects received over the 16 rounds, these subjects also had a lower mean reported tax rate than those who received lower bonuses altogether.
Yeah, because my concern, I made the question because my concern is that you show in the histogram that the mean is around truth telling, or so, or there is like there is a lot of observations there, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
And yeah, and I'm a bit concerned that people are just being or compensating across rounds. So I'm not sure what will happen with your results if you just use, even if it's not perfect measure, but just the first period to compare, because I think there is, at least with these die roll games, there is really people try to compensate when they report, in this case, lower numbers in the first round. They're trying to not look as dishonest.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, it could be sort of that they're trying to not appear too dishonest, but still they choose to cheat more on the tasks in which they received a higher bonus. So that's sort of so even if they are doing this sort of across rounds, they still sort of choose to cheat more on the high payoff tasks.
Because, for instance, I know a paper from some colleague from here that uses 2 dice, one high stakes or low stakes, and people compensate the low stakes with like the lies in the high stakes with the low stakes. So I'm not sure if something like that will happen with you.
Yeah, that is possible, of course. And I think it's a good idea to look at the first round. I'll certainly do that. I mean, of course, it's not perfect because they know that more rounds are going to come. And theoretically, each round should be sort of, they should see that it's an individual round because only one is chosen for payoff in the end. But of course, I can't know whether they kept that in mind and maybe just didn't see them as independent. So probably, maybe they didn't do that. So that's a good idea. Certainly have a look at the data from only the first round. Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Okay, so well, thank you very much for all your comments and in all of the session, all of the talks of this session, and that's probably it.
I have another question now that everyone is. Why did you choose to label as tax?
You mean why didn't?
Yeah, because to me it's quite like to going to real life examples is like you are not reporting tax rates but income, and the tax rates are that it's not under your control. The income is the variable, like talking about external validity. And I wasn't, if I remember correctly, a lot of papers that do tax evasion or something like that, people report incomes and not tax rates. So I don't know.
Yeah, that's true. Most of nearly all experiments on tax evasion actually use reporting income. The thing is, well, it's kind of logically equivalent. So if you misreport a tax rate, you lower the tax that you have to pay. And if you misreport your income, then you also lower the tax that you have to pay. And what was important to me was sort of to ensure that people basically know that the experimenter can't observe them on an individual level. So this sort of die rolling task seemed to be a really sort of good idea to do this. And it seemed sort of more understandable to subjects say, oh, well, I assumed it would be better understandable if they sort of roll a tax rate than if they sort of roll a percentage of their income that they would then have to report. And also, basically, you can also sort of misdeclare your taxes possibly in a way that you then sort of get into a lower tax bracket. So misdeclare your income, sort of say someone else of your family earned it instead of you, or I don't know, you declare it as a different type of income, and then you sort of go into a lower tax bracket, or maybe sort of you have to pay a lower tax rate. So this is sort of maybe where it could relate to that you can also maybe cheat in a way that you reduce the tax rate that you have to pay.
Yeah. Mainly, I have mainly this as a concern or as a question, mostly. Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Stan. Nice to see you. Yeah. I know you just by email.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.